It includes biochemists, physiologists, someone with expertise in cardiovascular physiology. There's a clinical anesthesiologist. There's a general surgeon, someone with a background in metabolism. There's a person with a background in immunology and transplant nutrition, a pharmacologist, someone with experience in pulmonary embolism, shock and trauma, toxicology, vascular surgery. I hope this makes the point more clearly than anything I can say, that when you write your aims and you write your abstract, every one of these people is looking at it. Aims, abstract, significance statement. You're reaching all these varied backgrounds. Don't just use the overly technical language, the language of your field. Every person has equal value. The discussion of applications, and again, I give you the website for an NIH, it's a little video, it's like 15 minutes long, it's short, but it shows you what happens in study sections. All applications are reviewed. In the future, all applications will be scored. I want to tell you now that the NIH is making major changes to the system of peer review, and they are beginning now in 2009. And I think some of them are great changes for new investigators. So I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to identify the changes that will have an impact on you. Until now, not every application that was submitted was reviewed, but not all received a score. And it could be very confusing if you had an unscored grant, and technically the bottom half of grants weren't scored. Well, in reality, it was the bottom 2/3 of grants because of the number of grants going in. And you know, there's a huge difference between a grant that just missed the top third and one that's way on the bottom, right? It's a huge range. So if you were trying to figure out, should I revise this grant? Should I start over? What's the message here? It was so difficult. This is a huge change, and this is a great change. Every application will be reviewed and will receive a score from here on out. Not every application will be discussed in study section. That decision, whether or not to discuss your application and possibly send you on to the institute to be funded, will be based on what is called, and this is really a mouthful, the preliminary impact score. What is the preliminary impact score? Prior to the review meeting, each application is going to be assigned a primary reviewer, a secondary reviewer, and what's called a reader or discussant. Here's how they're going to determine the preliminary impact score, and here's something you really, really, really want to know. There are 5 review criteria for every single grant. It's modified a slight bit for a K award, where we're also looking at the mentor, but in general, and including certainly with our Ks, the research plan of every grant, what's the significance, and I'm going to show you what they mean by these significance. Are you the right PI? Is there something innovative? What about your approach? Did you choose the best approach you could have to carrying out the aims? And what about your environment? Does it have what you need to carry out this research? That grant is going to be assigned reviewers who will report scores for each of these criteria on the summary statement, and they will then use these scores to determine this big preliminary impact score. So here's how it will work. For a discussed application, each application that's discussed in the study section is going to get this final impact score from every committee member. And this impact score will reflect their evaluation of your overall impact. How will they get that, and what is overall impact? Overall impact, what impact your research is likely to have on your field. That's why I've been hammering you about thinking about impact on the field. So it's not just a weighted average based on each of those 5 criteria. There's a little bit of an opportunity for a fudge factor here, because it's impact on the field. And that's why when we write about the significance of our research, we're going to write deliberately the significance of this research on the field is as follows. A potential result of this research in terms of other people working in the field is this. Here's how this research can contribute to other researchers in the field. Those are the words you really want to think about using. So this overall impact score, they're going to determine by calculating the mean score from all the eligible members' impact score and multiply by 10. So in other words, you have this new scoring system that will use a 9-point rating scale, 1 being the best, 9 the worst. It's almost counterintuitive. 1 is the best, 9 is the worst. Then it will be this overall impact score, we're going to multiply it out. The overall impact score will range from 10 to 90. You won't get an overall impact score for an application that isn't discussed. You'll just get the individual scores for innovation, for the investigator, for possible impact, for institution. So you get raw scores. But if your score was discussed, you get this overall impact score, which will be very helpful, I think, in determining whether to revise or start again. So every grant is now going to have a score, and it will be much clearer to you whether to revise or whether to start again. The potential problem from this, by the way, and I spoke about this yesterday, and I hope it's now clear why I feel this way. You're dealing with a much smaller range. Your score can only go from 10 to 90. In the past, it could go theoretically from 100 to 500. Never went up to 500, typically beyond 350, 300, it wasn't scored. But still, the range was much broader. 100 to 300 is much broader, obviously, than 10 to 90. Knowing that, what is very, very likely is that more grants will have identical overall impact scores, right? The score range is much smaller. So you're going to have a lot of grants, presumably, and I think predictably, with the same score. What's going to decide which one gets funded? And again, this is a new system. We honestly don't know, but with all the emphasis on overall impact, I don't think you need to be a fortune teller on this one. I think you need to think about what's going to be the impact beyond your particular research. I think that's going to be great in the future. I really do. I could not overemphasize that, and I hope it's clear why I feel this right now. So
the impact score is coming from all the members?
yes.
And so for those who are only, is there any like weighting based on your main reviewer and your secondary reviewer?
Yes, it's a great question. The primary and secondary reviewers very much guide the discussion. They're going to present, they will have read it in great detail, they're going to do a presentation at the meeting, and it's short. Each grant that's discussed, again, depending upon the study section, you can be looking, if you're lucky, 12, 15 minute discussion of your grant would be great. The perspective of the primary and secondary will very much guide, I think, how the reviewers score it.
How interesting is that?
The person who heads up the study section, and it's actually a scientist who heads up the study section who isn't a permanent employee, they're going to determine it based on background. So let's say you have that surgery study section where the expertise is all over the place, but your grant has to do with burn physiology. Okay, bingo. I'm going with that burn physiologist as the primary reviewer. Maybe I'll go with someone in metabolism for my secondary. So that decision is made by the head of the study section. The whole purpose of the study section meeting, and I use this slide very deliberately, to me it seems like the purpose is really, it's like a negotiation, and this is very much what you're asking, what goes on in the study section. It's a negotiation to figure out what's the impact score that best reflects the scientific, technical merit and potential impact on the field. And this negotiation process is led by the discussion of your primary and secondary, certainly your tertiary review to some extent, but it's driven by your primary and secondary. And again, remember what I said before, every reviewer, when you get your pile of grants, it is simply human nature that when you get a pile of grants, you know that if you're lucky, one of your pile is going to be funded, and it's just, you want one